Good evening, everybody. Welcome to tonight's event. What I wanted to do was, before I do the introduction to our speaker, I wanted to just remind everybody that tomorrow night we have the Ideas Forum in the Dodds Narrows room here in the Convention Center. We start at 7 o'clock, and I know we had asked people to register for that, and that was really to give us a sense of the numbers, but if you're interested, please join us. And we'll be sharing ideas tomorrow for a couple of hours. The Ideas Forum and then is followed by the Charrette, and we'll be holding the Charrette Thursday evening and Friday, Saturday. And that Charrette process involves 10 community members that have been selected through a nomination process, and a review of their statement of interest. We also will have stakeholders involved in the Charrette. We have some design team members, our consultants as well. We also have our committee, the South Downtown Waterfront Initiative Committee. I said, when I think of that, I should introduce myself. I'm Dave Whitty. I'm the chair of that committee. What I'd like to do now is introduce the rest of that committee, because we've been meeting every 2 weeks, and we've had the the Harbor Fair as well, and we had over 300 people attend that. So we've been quite a busy group. So myself as chair, Dave Whitty, and I'm representing Vancouver Island University on that committee. We have Vice Chair Doug Kelsix, who's a community at large member of the committee, and Sharoof, Community at Large member, Darren Moss, representing the Downtown Nanaimo Business Improvement Association. Actually, you could put up your hand, Darren, I saw you here. And I don't think Doug and Ann, I'm not sure. Oh, I'm sorry, you are right beside each other, my apologies. Sasha Angus, Nanaimo Economic Development Corp., I don't think Sasha's here. Mike Davidson from the Nanaimo Port Authority. Douglas Hardy from the South End Community Association. Douglas is over there. And is Dennis Trudeau here tonight? Not sure. Daniel's here, though, I think, from the regional district. Yeah, thanks, Daniel. And Fred Patchy, Nanaimo Advisory Planning Commission. Fred. So that's our committee, and we've, as I say, been hard at it, and this event tonight is part of our process. So before I go any further, cell phones off, please. I just turned mine off before I got up here, so just take a minute to do that. Appreciate it very much. It gives me great pleasure tonight to introduce my dear friend and a colleague, Larry Beasley. Larry retired as Director of Planning from the City of Vancouver how many years ago? 2005? 6. Currently, he's a Distinguished Practice Professor at the School of Community and Regional Planning at the University of British Columbia. Certainly, Larry has been recognized for his leadership in reshaping downtown Vancouver through his advocacy for the integration of land use planning and transportation planning, and also, as importantly, careful development management, and many people have called that Vancouverism. Larry had a major hand in helping shape downtown Vancouver. He currently chairs the National Capital Commission Advisory Committee on Planning, Design, and Realty. He advises cities and organizations around the world. He has been awarded an honorary doctorate from Simon Fraser University. He's a fellow of the Canadian Institute of Planners. He's also an honorary member of the Canadian Society of Landscape Architects. He was recognized as an advocate for architecture by the Royal Architectural Institute of Canada. In 2007, he received the Kevin Lynch Prize from MIT. It's the most prestigious award in American planning. And lastly, but not least, Dr. Beasley, Larry, is a member of the Order of Canada, our nation's highest honor for lifetime achievement. With me, please welcome Larry Beasley.
Well, I have this philosophy, Anytime David Whitty's involved in something and I can get my hand in it, I try to do it. He's always doing fascinating things all over the place, and there's always great results from that. So David, thank you for inviting me to participate in what I think is a very exciting and amazing time here in Nanaimo, and to be part of dreaming about the future of Nanaimo. My job tonight's a simple one, through words and images, to try to facilitate opening your consciousness, maybe beyond where you've been in the past, to dream very broadly, and to dream with rich color and detail, and to really think differently and about Nanaimo, so that you can make it a different place over time with the challenges and opportunities that you have in front of you. Tonight, before I start, I do also want to recognize a colleague of mine who I didn't know was going to be here, and is here. Pete Rutgers is his name. He's right here. Pete will find many of these images very much in his heart and soul, because he was leading the Parks Board team at the time that we did a lot of Vancouver's work. And so a lot of the images you see are going to be images of parks and recreation, and those are Pete's creativity, probably more than my creativity. And Pete, I'm very honored that you're here. Thank you for coming an hour from Up Island down to this. I really appreciate it. Water is a very magical thing in the urban cityscape. It's magical in and of itself because it offers a very glamorous counterpoint to the fabric of the city, and it provides a natural respite, this one I found today, from the city's very frantic, man-made environment, the intensity of the built city. But it's also magical because you usually find with it, in modern cities, a stretch of available land. Often these were port lands or rail yards or infrastructure sites or industrial sites, well used in their time, but often finished with that history and that past, or evolving out of that. Areas that can be designed and developed from scratch in a way that you just cannot do with more infill, incremental development in your city or any city. It's kind of ironic that what we see today as a great opportunity was in the past seen as a liability. Waterfronts until the third quarter of the 20th century were often seen as foul, dirty, smelly, unhealthy places that polite urbanism kind of turned away from them. Yes, you would have industry on a site. Yes, you would have transportation. Often in the cities of the world, you would find vice down at the water. But polite urbanism kind of turned away from it. But after the war, this all started to change, and it offered our generation a very unexpected, at the time, opportunity. Sizable land areas, well located, with that gleaming adjacency of water. And for any city that finds itself in this situation, it is a very special moment. I would say it's an epical moment for your city. It is a time that you can dream and that you can conjure up a different view, a different vision for your city. And I can sense from tonight and from talking to David and from everything I've seen and read so far that this is the situation here in Nanaimo with this South Downtown Waterfront Initiative. And it was the same for me and for my city in Vancouver about 25 years ago with the availability of our waterfronts in False Creek and Cole Harbor in our inner city. So today, I want to weave together a story for Nanaimo that I hope will reinforce that creative process that you're involved with, and that will acknowledge and help you build upon the success that you have already seen here in this city. And by the way, I should tell you that my experience of what you have already done is right up there with the best experiences I've had in many places in the world. It's a well done first round in transforming your waterfront, and it is in and of itself quite inspirational. The story I'm going to tell you comes from my own experience in Vancouver and elsewhere. I'll be showing you elsewhere as well, about factors that seem to be essential for a great city in the modern world. I would even dare call these universal factors of cities. These are the factors that a smart waterfront development can tap into and can incorporate as you build out your waterfront in your city. The story really comes from my realization in many different parts of the world that a great city will not happen by accident. You can't just hope it's going to happen. You can't just expect it's going to happen. And frankly, you can't just depend upon the old processes that you've had in place in your city in the past and assume it's going to happen. You have to make it happen. You have to bring the ideas forward, and you have to fight for them, and you have to bring them to ground and make them happen. In other words, I'm saying you will find your urban success really by design, not by accident. So let me start with what, for me, having said that, was a very profound inspiration just a few years ago. I was in Madrid in Spain, and I was conferring with a group of European city planners, and a fellow guest was the great Brazilian urbanist Jaime Lerner. Many of you may know Jaime Lerner. He was the mayor of Curitiba in Brazil and did many other amazing things. And he said something that has always, since I heard it, guided my thinking. He said, every city has to have a design. A city without a design doesn't know where it's going, doesn't know how to grow. And this is a very profound statement, I think, for all of us. It's a very fresh way to look at cities, and it also reminds us of what's been missing in most of our cities since, well, probably the late 19th century, early 20th century. It was also a very profound statement when I heard it for me, because it, in a nutshell, said what I knew had been our way of doing things in Vancouver as we took on that massive waterfront redevelopment starting in the late 1980s, through which we literally transformed our city through urban design. So today I will be using Vancouver as my case in point, my case study, you might say, but I'll also be using other examples from places that I've worked or visited and been impressed by, and I will be using examples from here in Nanaimo as well that hit well on the points I want to make. And I want to list and describe the prime factors for a better city, and I want to show how the presence of water can be key to unlock the difficulties of the past, the barriers, the limitations of the past, and allow you then to realize something that you may have never thought about for Nanaimo. And as I take off, I should say, take off on the charrette in the next few days, the drawing and the dreaming and the debate and all of that, I commend you to really think big. Don't think small. Ask yourself some very basic questions. What represents value in the contemporary city? What are the qualities, tangible and intangible qualities, that attract people to live and work and play and visit in the city in harmony with one another and the environment around them? How do we find, or more to the point, create those qualities? And how do we optimize them to assist a city to be in a part of the world competition of cities that is going on? You are a city that needs to draw the world to you, because cities who don't do that are being left and are going to be left behind in the future. What is that about? How do we struggle to create the urban wealth and value our land and our activities and our endeavors? But more importantly, how do we engage in the struggle for the hearts of our citizens, who are more discerning than ever before. They are more critical than ever before. They have higher expectations than ever before. How does the waterfront opportunity help us to approach these challenges and these issues? And I think these are very fundamental questions. But why are they so important for Nanaimo at this point as compared to some other point in time? And the reason is that as you move forward with these waterfront lands, you're not just going to be doing another project. You are going to dramatically change Nanaimo forever. Now, you've already had a good taste of it, as I've already alluded to, with your waterfront change that you have done and the things that you've added. But the scale is going to be very, very different in the future. It's not about one or two or three buildings and a delicious open space that I went out and I could hardly pull myself away from today. It's about hundreds of buildings. It's about many open spaces. The scale is very, very different and much more impactful on the rest of the city. Let me show you basically what I mean. Here is a panorama of my city, of Vancouver, that shows what has occurred in this incredible transformation over the last number of years. Everything that I'm going to show you today did not really exist just about 20 years ago. 20 years, that's not several lifetimes. You know, if you have a 5-year-old, she will be 25 only when you can see dramatically the changes in your city. You know, in many ways, I've come to realize that Nanaimo and Vancouver are quite alike. We both have a very beautiful natural setting. We both historically were very comfortable, smaller communities, but we're both facing a shifting economy away from resource extraction and management of that process to something a lot more diversified. Now, for Vancouver, the shift happened earlier. It happened just around the time of Expo 86, and it caused us to start to worry big time about our city's future, the image of our city as we move to the future. But I have to say that the single biggest factor that changed everything from theory and worry and politics and all the rest of it to action was that we found ourselves through almost an accident of history at that time with vast tracts of waterfront land, over 500 acres in the inner city, that became available for urban development, primarily because the railroads moved their marshalling yards to the suburbs. That kind of sounds familiar. I understand that you have about 150 acres at play in the development that you're going to be involved in. And if you walk, as I did today, just up from that development, you find many, many more acres of potential change, areas that could be evolved, perhaps more gently, perhaps more carefully, but nonetheless will be evolved. Your waterfront development sites will put everything in motion. And I have to say, what amazing potential that represents. But I also have to say what amazing negative impacts it can represent if you're complacent about it or if you don't get the patterns right and move forward in a creative way. And it really is that potential that is the heart of the story that I want to tell you today. Now, as I do, just a note on the pictures. I'm going to be using lots of pictures, well over 500, I think, in this presentation. They'll come from Vancouver because that's where I worked for years. They'll come from many other places as well that I think have something to illustrate the points. But I don't want you to take these pictures at face value. You know, in your mind, I want you to take every single one of these pictures and translate it into the unique scale and the unique personality of Nanaimo. You know, I want you to see how these pictures can build upon the success that you already have from what you've already done here in Nanaimo. I hope that you won't think there's one of these images that is well worth copying or well worth importing here to this city, because we have too much of that going on in the world. People trying to take one idea and take it to a completely different context. It just makes your city average. It doesn't make your city special. But I do want the pictures to, in a sense, inspire you. I want the pictures to open your consciousness. And I would say probably the images are as important as my words. And that's why I've spent as much time collecting these images as I have putting together the text. So let's get on with it, having said that. The first factor that I need to talk about doesn't actually necessarily even focus on waterfronts at all, but it's kind of a preamble to getting the most out of your waterfronts. It deals with the regional context, the overall shape of the metropolis in which the waterfront development exists. We have to design the basic urban structure of our cities. Now, we've got to get the regional land use and transportation arrangements right. The themes are to save vital open space, to allocate land uses so we get things people want to do close together, to offer a movement system that de-emphasizes the car. It's not about getting rid of the car at all, but certainly de-emphasizes the car, but is still appealing to people, and that motivates and development that will, or activity that will motivate compact growth. And in this respect, in Vancouver, our starting position through what was then called the Greater Vancouver Regional District, now the Metropolitan Government, was a great regional plan. And then, very importantly for us, and I'm a little worried about the current discussions going on, has been the Agricultural Land Reserve. Both of those things were very vital at a regional level because it secured for us, in a sense, a secure green zone around the development area of the city. At the same time, we have a green protected zone, and then we have development itself clustering more and more through the time into differentiated town centers. And this creates, on the one hand, a kind of a growth boundary, but more importantly, the boundary is not what is important. It focuses growth. It focuses activity in part so that you can have enough going on at one place to make something start to happen, to make people start to be interested. But also, in our case, it protected over 50% of our land area from urban development. And that's necessary in a city. A city needs the respite of open space and green. The ecology needs it in order to function properly. And this kind of regional overview helps to ensure that that occurs. Now, in our case, you may know that we've become quite famous for a very counterintuitive approach to transportation. We don't have freeways fanning out from our core. We're limiting automobile capacity into the inner city. We're connecting the emerging town centers with rapid transit, and we are shooting for movement choices. We want all kinds of transit, not just rapid transit, but buses, and I hear that you might even be talking about streetcars and that sort of thing, more cycling. We're trying to add cycling, even ferries, but mostly building the infrastructure for people on foot. All of this in preference to the automobile. Now, what we do is that we integrate the new streets with the old streets to have as many connections as possible, the old with the new in the street system. We want the automobile to have a place in the new urban system of the future. We acknowledge that most modern Canadians are not going to freely give up their automobiles, but we don't want the automobile and its needs to distort everything around it the way that it has been occurring in our cities for at least half a century. Now, you're probably thinking right now, and I know that one of the biggest struggles with all this is that we have a deep cultural romance with the private car in Canadian society, in North American society. Can we build the alternatives fast enough, and will they be good enough to really compete with the car? And I don't think we're out of the woods on this. I don't think anyone can predict how that story is going to turn out. But I have learned one fundamental thing, and that is that the best transportation plan is actually not a transportation plan at all. It's a good land use plan. A land use plan that really causes there to be less needs for moving around, less needs for the trips than we have thought about in the past. For example, in our downtown, where we have really tried to make the land use plan work for us, we've seen a drop in automobile ownership and automobile use. We have less cars coming in and out of that core city than we had 10 years ago, even with the massive amount of new development that we have seen. Over 60% now in the core of all the trips that are taken of all kinds are actually done by non-motorized modes. That doesn't even include transit. Non-motorized modes, and of course that's almost all people walking. This is a very unheard of kind of statistic in North America. It's not as unheard of in some European cities, but certainly it is in North America, and a very important aspiration. There is something else, though, that I find pretty interesting. Statistically, we're also thinner and healthier than any other place in the country as a result, in part, of these kinds of policies. So I would say, starting with the bigger picture, I hope that you will do an audit of the regional patterns and plans here in Nanaimo as part of your dreaming process and your Charrette process for planning the waterfront, and try to make sure that you have the right contextual circumstances and policies to ensure the success here in the core. It's kind of like an organic thing. The shape of the edges helps to determine the success in the core. The energy in the core helps to feed the energy and success at the edges. There's a harmonious balance that needs to be struck. Now, this brings me then to the second element that I want to talk about. We've got to get it right in calibrating density with pervasive efforts for quality of life. Now, the specifics are going to be different in every different community because tolerances of populations and people are quite different from place to place, but the themes seem to stay the same regardless of where I've been working around the world. Bringing together development intensity, mixed use, community infrastructure, and amenity values is all necessary. It has to all work together. You can't leave a part of it out. Using the Vancouver example back to that end, that combination, the most powerful policy in our city that we've pursued in the core, in the inner city, was an intensive residentially based growth strategy that tried to balance that natural inclination in the core for commercial development. You may have heard of it it's been called by many the Living First strategy downtown, and it's based on a concept of coherent neighborhood units, because consumers actually make housing choices, not just according to the quality of the house, but according to the quality and the nature of the whole neighborhood. So this is the idea is to have those housing choices, but make sure that everything is together for the day-to-day living of people in a neighborhood context. This includes pedestrian scale and all the amenities and services at hand, a local shopping high street, we call it, or you have perhaps here more of a clustering of commercial retail opportunities at the center to provide the basic needs of people, but also to provide places where people can get together to create the localized culture that really helps a neighborhood come alive and begin to sing. So the standard amenities that we required in all of our planning are noted here, and you'll probably look at that and say, well, doesn't everyone include that? But sadly, I can tell you, I've seen many waterfront developments around the world that's left out schools because they didn't think kids were a part of it, that the community centers might or might not be included, etc. No, it all has to be included. And here then is a sense of the targeted scale for those neighborhood units. You're searching for about 10,000 people in an area of about a 15-minute walking diameter so that you have enough people living close together who can walk to the kind of things that they want on a day-to-day basis. Also, it's very essential that open space and the public realm be used to contribute to neighborhood identity and neighborhood amenity. In our case, we've settled on the street as the focus of public life, so we include things on the street like grass boulevards, a double row of trees along all the streets, very lush landscaping, which has the effect to screen the harshness and the density in quite a big way. We also push for ample private spaces in these kind of very delightful enclosed courtyards, but even more importantly in roof gardens such as these, where residents can really escape the action outside for the privacy and the safety and the quiet of their own private space, their own little garden space. That doesn't mean we don't support parks. Of course we do. Parks are an absolutely essential part of the equation. In our case, along our waterfront, we've added about 65 acres of new parks all along the waterfront, tied together by the waterfront walkway and bikeway system. I was pleased to see that basic organization starting to occur here. A lovely waterfront walkway system, one of the best that I've seen, and then the destination, absolutely glorious park, and I assume that you could carry that on in the kind of planning that you will do in the new areas. For us, density is unquestionably our goal. We want the city to be as compact and as dense as we can make it, but we have found that the impacts of larger scale buildings have to be managed. You can't just leave that to chance, or else you'll start getting reactions like this. Very negative reactions to people to very unpleasant architecture. So we carefully regulate design, including quality materials, preserving heritage wherever we can, and then managing the important things of security and noise and privacy and the interface conditions, all for the quest of what we call neighborliness. Neighborliness is the fundamental key to how people comfortably find themselves living together at higher densities. Now, it's easy to talk about all this in the abstracts, like some lecture, but we would not really have been able to implement, first discover, I think, but more importantly, implement these urban design policies without our waterfront mega projects, these very large projects. These very large inner-city development sites really allow you to conceptualize and shape whole neighborhoods all at once. This is one of those neighborhoods that I was talking about. And it allows you to test things. It allows you, for example, to do something very simple, move buildings around so that you can find the open space. Because in a city like Vancouver or Nanaimo or the core of almost any city I know, buying land at retail prices for parks after the fact is very, very expensive. In fact, it's almost too expensive to think about for most city councils. But when you're doing something of the big site, you can just move buildings around and you open up the land that you need. But having said that, I would say the most important thing, though, is the water. The water in and of itself, that expanse of a sheet of water with all of its inherent amenity provides a true respite from the claustrophobia of the city. It allows the density to much more comfortably happen. Its beauty is part of the equation. It brings a kind of a fascination to the lives of people that go to the water. People in Vancouver are, and every city I've seen this happen, whether it's Hammarby in Stockholm or wherever, people are drawn to the water because it just augments your life moment to moment. My point in all this really is to say that most people hate density. I bet you if I took a vote in this room right now about high density, I would get less than 30% who would just very actively raise their hand in support of that density. And the reason for that is that it's all pretty much been very poorly done. It's been very unpleasant for most people for almost, since the 30s. And I don't blame people for hating density, but the thing is water and lavish green space that you can add to that waterfront equation, along with thoughtful design, really does allow you to change all that. It allows you to change the experience of density And the experience that I've had is that it can dramatically change consumer attitudes about density. People who never thought themselves living in a higher density setting will then start to consider that. Here are some interesting examples, one in Auckland where the water is just right there, this one in Copenhagen. Here's a lovely one in Rostock, of all places, that really begins to take advantage of the water and the adjacency of it. Now, situations like this are not without their problems, and I want to put one of them on the table in a big way because it relates to any bold move toward densification. There can be nearly uncontrollable impacts of frenzied new development on existing lower income communities nearby. And there are almost always lower income communities nearby large downtown waterfront development sites. All that development energy, unbridled, can be just another pressure to destabilize these quite vulnerable and important communities in the mix of a whole city. So I say beware of land speculation and gentrification. Beware of ignoring those endemic social problems that are on the streets in most of our cities, such as substance addiction, mental illness, and simple poverty. These are constant stresses in any city. We found that they were among the most constant stress in our planning in Vancouver, and I have to say that we still don't have solutions that are solid enough that I can stand here and tell you that this is the way to go. What I can say without any hesitation is that you will face the same kinds of problems here. So you can't deny it. You have to begin to put in place from the beginning strategies that help to moderate those impacts. Well, there is, though, and I have to come back to it, a successful formula with waterfront developments when you can bring density and quality together, tightly together. The architectural solutions and the natural amenity of the water really do allow the density to work. That's the case I've been trying to make over the last few minutes. The high density then generates enough value to carry quality construction, great on-site amenities, and a very nice contribution to the neighborhood's infrastructure. And then the supportive neighborhood draws all kinds of people back to a truly urban lifestyle, people who had never thought that they would really want to consider a truly urban lifestyle, which creates the vector of demand that is essential for a vibrant city, which creates the new economic and social opportunities that really create a vibrant city. And the results, I think, in Vancouver are, to some degree, should make you optimistic here in Nanaimo. Our waterfront change has spurred on just as much development upland than has occurred on the waterfront itself through the last 20 years or so. And through that, the population of our inner city has more than doubled. It stands now at about 110,000 people in a little over 2 decades, and it continues to grow. It continues to thrive. And the real secret of all this is you can't force people there. You can't say they have to go there. It's all about, the carrot. It's all about enticement, making the place a preferred choice for them on their own terms, not on your terms. Now, there's no question that civic design is also about social design. So the next factor that I believe for a better urbanism that we have to get right is social mix. The principle is that the city must be accessible to everyone, and the more diverse is the mix of people, the stronger and more robust is the civic, economic, and social structure. Again, the availability of land on the waterfronts allows this to happen because trying to create a social mix is a very expensive thing to do. In Vancouver's waterfront, for example, for the first time in our history, we had to put in place some fundamental policies to achieve a basic social mix. Our waterfront plans, for example, target a genuine economic mix in both non-market housing, as you see this here is a non-market housing building, and in market housing for every multiple family neighborhood area. So in our particular policy, 20% of housing in new neighborhoods has to be developed for low-income people. It also includes a mix of household types, building the new city for seniors and for children. And I want to pause and concentrate on the issue of dense family housing because actually this is the key to the entire demand perspective for the development that you might do here in Nanaimo or in any city that I've seen around the world. And it's because of a simple demographic fact, and it is that still most households have children in them. There are not enough of those, what are often called by demographers, the natural downtown consumers, the empty nesters, or the young singles here, or the empty nesters that you see here, to create a sustained market. And what I've seen in about 10 different markets that I've paid close attention to is that after a rush toward development in an area like you're looking at, it then stalls because all the empty nesters have homes and all the young singles who are interested have homes, and they are a minority of the households that are being formed every year. So you have to come back to looking at families on your waterfront sites. And what we did is we developed a set of guidelines from empirical research about what families needed in higher density living, and we then required that 25% of all of the housing was designed specifically to meet the needs of these families according to the guidelines. And I am happy to be able to tell you that families are flooding back to downtown Vancouver in record numbers. We have, for example, over 1,000 row houses now, which were really piloted on our waterfront sites, creating a housing option for families that didn't even exist. There were 4 row houses when we started. The number of kids in the inner city is just growing by leaps and bounds. We now have over 8,000 children downtown. That's more children living downtown than in the surrounding neighborhoods of any one of the surrounding neighborhoods of downtown. And more than 29% now, not quite 30%, but 29% of the downtown households that have been built in this generation include children. So not only is it urgent to do it from a demographic and market point of view, but it's possible to do it if you just pay attention. So don't trust the debate that was held in Toronto about 6 months ago, where they concluded that children couldn't live downtown. I don't know how that debate came about. Don't trust it. You don't have to go there. And there was a spin-off benefit that we discovered that was very, very good, made us very happy, and that was that we discovered that if you design in detail a city, an area that works for a child, it then works well for everyone. Everyone lives better and more comfortably in that city, and so that's just good for everyone. In our case, that diversity I was talking about goes further. It includes other kinds of housing forms as well, such as live-work units and artist studios and lofts, and in our case, even houseboats. All of it is to diversify the opportunities of choice for households. We had this philosophy in Vancouver that if you wanted to propose a new way to live, we were prepared to consider it and then see if we could make it work. And that's really because it's trying to deal with the consumer desire for more and more diversity. And waterfront developments help you because there's usually enough wealth at play and space at play, focused among usually a very few entrepreneurs, that you can actually negotiate to achieve these kinds of objectives. Much harder to do with hundreds of individuals doing separate kinds of development. And I think that's more or less true, as I understand it, here in Nanaimo, and that gives you some pretty big benefits. See, to make the formula work for all the public goods, the social and amenity provisions, government and business have to share some of the wealth that is created when the public, the city council, decides to let an area have more development. An attractive community, whether it's in Halifax or wherever it is in the country, is simply a costly thing to put in place because the demands of people, as I said at the beginning, are so much higher than it used to be. And so some of the costs have to come from the development process. We never touch the basic developer profit. You can never touch that, not $1 of it. But what you can do is touch and take and share some of the land value increases that come when you decide to let a piece of land be developed much more intensively. You will know that great value is created the moment that a number of city councilors, a majority of city councilors, raise their hand and say, yes, I'm in favor of a more intensive development. Before anything is outdone, new value is created, and that's the value that can be shared. It's a windfall value of great intensity and value. In fact, it can accommodate hundreds of millions of dollars in public amenities without ever touching the profit of the developer. Jaime Lerner, the urbanist I was telling you about from Curitiba, calls it the coefficient of co-responsibility. He takes a public perspective. Or my predecessor in Vancouver, Ray Spaxman, called it the magic of the quid pro quo. He takes the negotiator's perspective. Or you could be as vulgar as my good friend Andres Duani, the architect, who simply says premium products sell for more. So invest in them. Make all the bells and whistles that people need, most of which are not in the home, they're in the community. Now, several problems persist. Inevitably, a popular city with a glamorous waterfront development, like you're going to be having in the future here in Nanaimo, exacerbates affordability for housing. In fact, a world truth, is that as your city becomes more successful, housing prices go up. And that's because we're footloose in the world, more people want to come to you, less product is available, supply and demand, up go prices. And in our case, with all we've tried to do, even with our 20% policy, we've not invested enough in social housing, and so we do still have this homelessness that's haunting us, and the waiting lists for social housing are getting longer and longer. But even more anxiously is the issue that's emerging now for middle-income households, where demands are soaring for that kind of housing. Housing formation is at an all-time high, and yet finding affordable alternatives for middle-income people is becoming harder and harder. We're starting to now have to look to European examples and other parts of the world who've had to address this many years ago. No city can afford to be complacent on these issues, or everything else you're talking about, will just start to come apart. It'll start to unravel. Now, a key factor of cities related to mix and diversity is culture. Smart cities who want to be competitive, who want to be remembered, who want to be loved by their citizens, always find a way to express themselves through their great cultural institutions that end up linking them with a world culture, such as this one, or more importantly, maybe this one. And also they will also invest in more avant-garde, smaller cultural initiatives that help to generate the local community culture. There is both a connection to world culture and a strength of community culture that's quite important in successful cities. Cities will create places where people can celebrate, maybe where people want to protest from time to time. And I have to say, in Vancouver, we are not the best model on this. While we have, in fact, expanded our conference facilities in Cole Harbour, we've added our stadia downtown, we've created Science World out of one of the pavilions from Expo 86, we're only now starting to think about growing our art gallery and our music and dance and visual arts institutions. In this respect, we're kind of a hesitant story for you. There are some much better examples. This example in Copenhagen is a lush and beautiful example, or this plan for a new museum in Abu Dhabi is quite inspirational. But the experience of Vancouver does not change the fact that waterfront lands create a phenomenal opportunity for cultural growth. And a smart city is going to make a priority of having at least some of their waterfront development allocated to cultural facilities, in my opinion. These kind of facilities really do anchor everything else, and they draw a lot of energy to them, not the least of which is they draw the attention of the world to your city, which helps to position it in the world. Now I want to move to the heart of urban design. The next factor for a great city is getting the built form right. The principle is that there is kind of a natural built form that responds to the different setting and public tastes of every city. It might be low-rise, or it might be mid-rise or high-rise. Now in Vancouver, there's no debate that the high-rise, and more recently the mid-rise, is our preferred form, especially along the water where everyone wants to enjoy the spacious views and all that. But that may not be right for Nanaimo. It may be that a modest, more gentle scale is more suitable or more interesting to your people. I like this example from Rotterdam. These are just 2- and 3-story townhouses, a very good scale, nice density, a lot of space for people, very popular for Rotterdammers. Many cities in the world, in fact, here's Helsinki, here's Auckland again. Many of the smart cities in the world are not going high-rise. They're going mid-rise and low-rise because they've tested that with their citizens, and the citizens are not on for the big high-rise approach. Whatever the height it is, though, we have found everywhere that complex buildings, in particular, have to have the architecture right. We can't stand for the architecture that we've been given in cities, particularly smaller cities, for the last half-century. Success or failure depends on the details of the architecture, and your city has to demand, not only as consumers but as government, that they get that quality in the architecture. For example, in our case, because of the tower, we want very thin towers. We want, and we actually regulate a separation among towers so you can see around and through them to enjoy those views. We broker private views for every building that's added to the ensemble. Who's gaining views, who's losing views. That's very important. For mid-rises, such as you see here, or this case back in Rostock, or in Vancouver more recently, in this case, we're carefully sculpting the buildings in order to open up vistas and provide light and spaciousness and a sense of separation so people don't feel crowded. But equally important in all of these cases, high-rise, mid-rise, doesn't really matter, we always go for a very coherent, dominant street wall at the traditional scale with the bases of tall buildings kind of shielded from the sidewalk. And that helps to cut the impacts of those really big buildings for people walking along the street. They almost float out of your consciousness when you do these little manipulations of architecture. And this is how we've discovered that massive building projects can be really humanized. It's also important to bring active residential right down to the sidewalk level as often as you can. We like our shop houses, so as you see here, the shop and the housing above, but just as often we're pushing for row houses to really, really domesticate the street. So what this means in urban design guidelines is such things. We don't allow blank walls. We want lots of doors and porches and stoops and windows and almost any fascinating detail down at eye level. This includes weather protection along all the commercial walking routes from the new to the old and back. Essentially what we're saying is within the first 3 to 6 floors, there has to be a kind of intimate, fascinating detail and urban quality that engenders a strong sense of place and comfort. I would dare even say hominess, civility, safety, very important safety, and vivid memory. And from an economic and real estate perspective, value and more value and more value. And all the communities that I've mentioned all around the world are putting all the parking, except for a bit of visitor parking, underground. and they're cutting their parking standards to as low as they can make them. And then they're pushing for alternatives. They're not trying to get rid of the car, but they're pushing for alternatives, such as car shares, so that you have less need for cars and therefore less need to store cars. And then moving back to open space, the character of open space, the shape of open space is very important. So in our case, we avoid those plazas that are just left over when someone builds a tower, and we use buildings to give good form to public parks and to public squares. And then all of the public areas are embellished with as much public art as we can build into the equation. Like you, we have to manage sun and shade to keep our public spaces as warm as they can be in our cool climate. And then streetscapes. We extend the street and then we have continuity of streetscapes, so it becomes very hard to see the difference between the old and the new. And then in our case, we've actually begun to sculpt the whole profile of the city in order to protect really important public view sheds, view corridors, to make sure that the waterfront development reinforces the existing development that came before it, that sits behind it. Now, the worst things you can do is kill one part of your city when you build another part of your city. You have to make sure that you're not doing that the one doesn't damage the other. And it really is that comprehensive development opportunity of the waterfronts, in our case, all around the downtown peninsula. You remember that map that I showed you before, that allowed us to really explore all of these design parameters, model them on the ground, and then set the policies in place that have now confirmed them as the iconic shape of the new city that people are beginning to remember. Those big, high-profile projects just cause you to have to ask questions that you don't have to ask in other circumstances because you're dealing with a clean slate, an open, undeveloped situation. There are also chances to do things just differently and better, to try some things out, to experiment, and that's the thing you can't really fritter away. If your community is really attuned to design, then everyone pitches in the design process to build an attraction. Your city becomes an attraction as a result of that. Now, you can guess the kind of problem that you have to deal with when you talk about these kind of public objectives. You know, how does the private market deal with it? How are private market objectives also balanced? You can't ever create a circumstance where developers are not interested in doing anything, or else nothing happens in a free society. So how much regulation will people accept? How can the amenity benefits that people have to pay for be balanced with developer profits? And what we discovered that in Vancouver's case, I can say very, very clearly, most Vancouver developers now get this equation. They understand that there is the need for amenity, there's a need to help to pay for amenities, and that the net effect of that is that, you know, business has never been better. They've never been making more profits, and so they're quite cooperative with the system. And many cities all around the world now confirm this same thing, so that the idea that you used to hear about years ago where the developers would struggle with these things really aggressively is happening less and less, because the developers realize that the more that these holistic things can be achieved, the better the business situation is for them. Now, I also want to cover tonight what I think is a new frontier of civic design, and that is the responsibility for sustainability, getting it right in all the key factors that are really degrading the planet. We have to create an alternative infrastructure that's compatible with the natural environment. And I have to admit, Vancouver kind of got a slow start on this. After all, when we started our planning 25 years ago, no one knew what the word sustainability meant. But we've been trying to make up for that. And again, it's to our waterfronts that we have turned to model the new behavior, to put things in place that now affect all development in the city. And the Athletes' Village, for the Olympics, now just known, as many of you know, as The Village, has really become the most recent testing ground for a much more comprehensive and systematic sustainable development approach for a high-density, socially, economically, and environmentally sustainable place. Phase 1 is now built. It's now, after all the drama of will people want to live there and pay the price, it's now occupied. And we can start to see what the new frontier of sustainability looks like on the ground. And I show you this particularly because I think Nanaimo has to take this kind of development, as well as, say, Dockside Green in Victoria and a few others. You have to take this as your starting point, and you have to do better than we did on these kinds of developments, and for a very simple reason, and that is that nowadays the public is saying they want it. The green agenda is not a minority agenda for the cognoscenti. It has become a public agenda and a very important agenda. Now in the village, ultimately about 15,000 people will enjoy a very complete neighborhood with all the things that they need, but a neighborhood that then pushes the boundaries with an aggressive energy scheme, an advanced water management system, an innovative waste management arrangement, green building, construction techniques, an urban agriculture initiative, and diverse transportation offerings from transit, and particularly, as I said before, cycling and walking, and even provisions for environmental stewardship and environmental learning. And I'm proud to say that it has been designated a LEED Platinum community, which is a big accomplishment, but that should just be your beginning. That should be what you start from. And you know the problem. It's a very tricky thing to demystify all of this for the average developer and the average real estate person and the average consumer, and to make sure that it becomes a normal part of the development process, not something premium or something special. Sustainable development ultimately cannot cost more. It cannot be premium if we are to make it the new way of doing things. This is still a struggle. We are all still learning about this, and I'm hoping that with what you do on your waterfronts, you will add to the repertoire that people around the world are searching for, answers that people are searching for sustainability. Now, civic success, I've been talking a lot about design. It's not just about design, it's also about process. An essential element for a better city that you have to really get right is civic governance and growth management. And sometimes this can be the hardest thing of all. The key principles are inclusiveness of that process, flexibility of the laws and systems to satisfy the incredible diversity of demand that is out there, and collaboration and mediation among all the amazing interests of any modern city. In our case, for our waterfront development in Vancouver, we actually had to completely reinvent City Hall. We had to say everything we do, we're going to do differently. It was a wholesale reform, and we call the result the cooperative planning approach, where citizens, developers, city officials, elected and appointed, are all motivated to joint venture so that everyone can then enjoy the benefits. So for us, that started with a very clear, convincing overall vision for the future city that had been worked up with tens of thousands of citizens involved, and with the city leadership that went to create that vision. But it also meant a proactive planning agenda, day to day, month to month, year to year, a discretionary development management system, and a set of laws that are very light on hard regulations, but quite heavy on expectations, targets, incentives, bonuses, to make the right things happen, and also to get those public goods that I talked about. And then everyone has to work together, project by project by project, to broker the public and private trade-offs that really create the balance, on the one hand, of a project that we can all love and embrace and buy, on the other hand, a project that's economic and can be built. In our case, we incorporate pervasive and sustained public involvement every step along the way. That's obviously what you're doing here in Nanaimo as well. We use many different formats. We maintain what you might say is a continuous conversation with our citizens. But we also separate out, I'll warn you, we separate out professional advice on proposals, the urban design aspects, in the form of what we call peer review or an urban design panel review, because, urban design is kind of complicated. It's as much of a science as dentistry. or medicine or the other arts and sciences. And we found that community demands, that things that people want take a lot of airtime, but they need to be balanced with the art of building the city. And that has to come together as a balance, and you have to arrange that to occur. And then there is one final factor that I want to emphasize in this talk tonight, and that is something you have to get right, but it's almost impossible to describe. I'm talking about a kind of a intangible appeal of your city, an ambience about your city that excites or fascinates, that brings on that heartfelt response from people, that builds their genuine love of your city and their loyalty to the place, a place that they really do want to be in, that separates out your city from other cities in people's minds as a unique civic image. You kind of know it when it's there, almost intuitively, and you know it when it's missing. Whatever it is, it has to have a quality of mystery almost about it. It has to have a sense of magic. It's the spirit of the place, or some people say it's the soul of the place. And all the images that I've been using tonight, taken together, really do try to illustrate what that one-off quality is for my city that we've been trying to create, tapping the water, that glittering water, as a reality that's always been the essence of our city, but that we've taken for granted for way too long. It was hard to get to the water in our city until recent years. So the question really that you have to address is, what is Nanaimo's essence? What is it that you find essential and absolutely treasurable here in Nanaimo? And then you have to worry that in the mad rush to grow, that the appeal of the place cannot be lost. Many cities grew quickly, but they did lose the appeal. They did lose the magic. People don't care, but rather that you nurture that specialness. That's something very, very special. I hope that the images and my words have helped to show that urban waterfronts, whether it's here in Nanaimo or in downtown Vancouver and our shoreline, can in fact be the most important developments of your city in all of the generations of development. But you really do have to tap a different way of planning when you start to do these projects, which is why your charrette is so important. I call it experiential planning. It's really planning that tries to create the real, direct, tangible experiences within a setting that people tell us they want, and then making sure that all the places are accessible to people and they're fulfilling for people, all kinds of people. And then codifying that in a careful way so that it can not only be dreamed, but it can also be implemented in project after project. This means getting down to the human scale at the level of the street, and then shaping things to deliver the emotional side for people. Not just efficiency, not just fiscal prudence, not even just sustainability, as popular as that is today. I think we could take some inspiration from a little tiny country on the other side of the world. It's the country of Bhutan. And in Bhutan, every year, they certainly measure GDP, but they also measure what they call GHI. And you know what it is. It's Gross Happiness Index. I think that this is the issue that will make or break Nanaimo and any city that I'm working in around the world, is the attention to happiness, not just to getting things all right, to making sure that, A leads to B. Every city has its own DNA. It has its own special way and history of how it grew. And I think that's where the civic elements that I have been talking about tonight really become quite important in this charrette. What are these elements as you express them, as they are found here in Nanaimo? How do you carry these elements out of that history of Nanaimo into this new area that you're going to grow? And I think Vancouver can be a testimonial. The result of really an audacious, holistic waterfront redevelopment strategy led to this second panorama. I think that it sort of portends to what could occur here in Nanaimo, within your reach, because of these very nice waterfront sites that are now at play, is a future city that is surely connected with the world, but it's not a part of that geography of nowhere that seems to happen as cities get connected. It's a city that also will be very popular with your citizens. It'll be a city that can pay for itself. It will be a city that'll be a 24-hour kind of place. It'll have lively street life. It'll have tourist appeal, which is very, very important. It'll be beautiful. It'll be approachable. It'll be charming. It'll be a city that really works for more people and leaves less people behind with isolation or alienation. And it'll be a city that is on a very solid foundation for the future, enticing all kinds of new people to come and help to create the city, to create the culture of the city, but most importantly, to create something that is diversified and catalytic for your city that will give you everything you need from an economic and social and cultural base in the future. And that, I think, is what this charrette is really all about. It's really something in the next few days that you can do for Nanaimo as you participate in the charrette. You can reinvent Nanaimo. You can reinvent it as a thrilling, fascinating, fulfilling city by design. Thank you very much.
We have an opportunity for some questions. We can go for say another 15 minutes in questions if that works for people. So we've got a mic and Chris Jackson on that side, and I neglected to thank Chris for his work for the committee, and Chris, thanks for your work assisting the committee. So entertain any questions.
In Nanaimo right now we have a contentious issue going on with the possibility of the development of a waste incineration plant on Dew Point. Now, with the development of the downtown waterfront corridor, do you think that industrial developments can happen in the waterfront simultaneously and harmoniously with commercial and residential developments?
I like to use Granville Island as an example, where we have a concrete batching plant that coexists with one of the most livable, desirable places in this whole city, drawing tens of thousands of people constantly. It's possible. It's not always the best. It's not, it doesn't happen if you just assume they'll be comfortable. You have to really work to make things coexist. The best cities, however, in my opinion, I learned this from Jane Jacobs, a great American-Canadian urbanist. The best cities are diverse in the sense that they incorporate everything that's needed in the city, and they find a way to do it. The worst cities are the ones that separate everything out. You live over here, you work over here, you have recreation over here, and you do something else. So I'm always of a type as a designer and as a planner to say, if you need it, find a way to accommodate it. Don't make it happen by accident, but find a way to accommodate it. If you can avoid some of those very impactful uses, and I don't know how impactful that use is, but if you can avoid them, obviously that makes your life easier. But, you know, for Vancouver, we would not have given up that batch plant because the batch plant fed all the construction of all the city that we were planning. So we're certainly not going to give it up.
Larry, in Nanaimo, we have a very underfunded parks and landscape development funding in the city government.
Okay.
And there just doesn't seem to be a way to urge or nudge that forward, that they'll have a bigger budget for the nice things that you see in the pictures, such as, you know, more trees, more landscaping, more greenery. And to me, the most appealing pictures that you were presenting were ones which had a greenscape as a very key element, as a part of that ambience and atmosphere that was around them. And there just doesn't seem to be an understanding or a will or a grasp of how important the urban trees are to our environment. So many people look around, they look out their windows or out the car, they can see a skyline of conifers, which says, oh, well, Nanaimo is a very green city. But at the same time, you can drive down so many streets, be in so many neighborhoods, and there's just a dearth of landscape and scale of trees,
Yeah.
which are just part of to me, the heart and soul of an urban city like Toronto or Victoria, and Vancouver especially. You have one of the biggest tree planting programs that I know of, and it's a benefit that goes into decades and generations of a city that is really worth living in and worth enjoying. As a part of what you said, the happiness index.
Yeah.
It helps you relax. It helps you appreciate more of the surroundings because you feel gentler in those spaces by the presence of grand trees and a grand streetscape that supports the urban, the hard edges that are all around you.
Yep. Well, you kind of remind me in this conversation. And by the way,
Sorry, I was just overheard. He didn't ask a question.
I sort of heard one.
So the question, if there needs to be one, is how do you motivate a city council, to have a bigger vision than just the hard parts that they have to tackle in their work?
As I've walked around Nanaimo the last day or so, and I came early so that I could do that all day today, it is one thing I noticed, that landscape is not as pervasive in the actual urban part of the city as it is in the setting in which you are in. You remind me a little bit of Rotterdam. I did an assessment of Rotterdam 3 or 4 years ago, and the easiest conclusion I came to was that they needed to plant 100,000 trees. And if they could simply plant 100,000 trees, a lot of other ills and things would just kind of moderate. It's true of cities. Cities, always, if you go to a city that you feel is lush and expansive and enticing to you, you'll find a lot of trees. If you go to the great open spaces of Paris, for example, you will find a lushness of trees. Trees are very important. In fact, in Dallas, where I'm trying to work on reconnecting the city and the waterfront, what we're finding is the landscape strategy is more important than all the other strategies put together. So let me first endorse the proposition, as you dream about Nanaimo for the future, that landscape, trees, parks, green, it's essential. It's not a luxury at all. It's not something you spend money on after you spent all the other money. It's not the first thing that gets edited out when you do accounting of a project. It has to be protected. How do you do that? How do you get money for that? On the one hand, I will tell you, planting trees is one of the cheapest things you can do in any city. It's really cheap. And you don't have to get them when they're giant. You can get them when they're smaller, and everyone will look after them, and most of the work will come from neighbors. It's not an expensive proposition. That's why I've recommended it for Rotterdam. They're a very modest city economically. They don't have a lot of money. It was something they could do quickly, and they could do it pervasively, and most of the labor would come from individuals rather than from the government. On the other hand, I do want you to remember that as you open up 150 acres of your waterfront, probably as big as your downtown already is, you are going to open up billions of dollars, not millions, not thousands, maybe even not billions, maybe gazillions of dollars of wealth. Part of that wealth there's two kinds of wealth that come from development, just simply put. The wealth that comes from building the product. It's 15 to 20%. It's like building or manufacturing or producing anything else. If you don't get that, you will not do it. And then there's wealth that comes from buying a piece of property where you could build one house and getting someone to approve that you can build 300 houses or 5,000 houses on it. And more value comes from that. That value, Every smart city I know in the world is beginning to implement a system to share some of that value. Some cities take 90% of that value. Some cities take 10% of that value. But all cities take some of it nowadays if they're smart, and they then invest it in these kind of things. They don't invest it in just balancing the budget of their city, but they invest it in the amenities. And the reason they do that is because then no one cares that they took some of it, because then they can sell the products for a little bit more. So there is great wealth there, sir, that you can tap gently, carefully, with your development community, not against them, with them, and invest that in these amenities. And again, trees is one of the cheapest you can do. That wouldn't even take 1/10 of 1% of the wealth that is will come from increased land values in this 150 acres. And that 1/10 of 1% could plant your entire urban forest of Nanaimo. Those are what the numbers are. That's the volume of numbers we're talking about. So on the one hand, make that a priority in your dream. On the other hand, share a bit of this great wealth that you are going to be conferring on this property in a private market. That's my advice.
Thank you. My question's related to scale for Nanaimo. I was happy to hear you say that densification doesn't necessarily mean high rise.
Right.
You can do it at a low rise level as well, which is a discussion we have quite often in this community. And I'm just wondering, all of your examples, and I've been to many of them, are all huge cities. This is Nanaimo. We're 85,000. We're maybe going to be 100, maybe 150,000. What kind of suggestions can you give to people doing this charrette and involved in this public process to bring that kind of idea down into a scale that's suitable for Nanaimo? I don't think we're trying to move Cole Harbour or Falls Creek and put it on these 150 acres of land. We need something that relates to this community. And I just would be interested in your kind of guidance in that way.
Well, the first thing, because I agree with you 100%. In fact, one of my fears in showing you some of the images in this presentation is that automatically they feel unscaled right for Nanaimo. That's why I said at the beginning, don't take them at face value. I think the first thing you should do is talk to your citizens about scale. You should find out what your citizens feel about the scale of the city. You might be surprised. We talked to our citizens about towers, and we discovered, contrary to what common wisdom was, that the great majority of our citizens actually wanted taller buildings because they love the views and et cetera. That's not what I found elsewhere. That's not what I found in many, many other cities. People mistake height and density, and so they can see something that's, say, 6 stories or less, maybe 4 stories or less. It'll be the very same density as a tower, and they'll hate the tower and they'll like the lower scale. You have to find out what your people like, what they prefer. And I think you need to make it a systematic set of questions for them so that they can make choices. Give them graphics to be able to make choices. I would emphasize something I said in the presentation. Most cities of the world, and I say this is truer of mid-sized cities than the great large cities. Most cities of the world, mid-sized and low and smaller, are tending to err on the side of a modest to middle scale. They're seeing, first is their citizens don't want the high scale. Second is their land values do not make that high scale absolutely imperative. But even beyond that, they don't have enough demand to feed that high scale. They only have a certain amount of demand in a year, and it only can accommodate a certain scale and a certain module, I'll call it, of development in a year. Now, you will build demand. When we started in Vancouver, this is also true in the work I've been doing in Rotterdam and Dallas and a few other places, the demand was pretty flat because it was pretty horrible to think about living that place. And you can build that interest. You can take many households that never would have considered that, begin to consider coming and wanting to live in downtown Nanaimo because you've got a visionary plan they love. Your first 2 developments were just divine, delicious developments, and so, it builds their interest and builds demand. But there's only so much in the system at any point in time. And you need to understand the economic trajectory of demand. We are in a world, and particularly North American society, that we build from the supply perspective. We don't build from the demand perspective. The first thing I did in my work in Abu Dhabi, for example, in the Middle East, was I said, before we do plans, let's actually project demand. And we discovered demand about 1/3 of the number of projects that were proposed on the table, and so we had to negotiate all those projects back by sometimes 2/3 in order to be able to get something where supply and demand were in line. Understand demand, understand your people's interests, understand the flexibility or the amount of maneuverability there is to build different kinds of demand, and then make your choice. And it'll be a better choice. And it'll be more sustainable, because if it doesn't work economically, you can draw all the designs you want, you can make them as beautiful as the world can do, and you still won't get them done. So I suspect a more modest middle scale is suitable. Let me just tell you one final thing. In the world, some cities are getting it that they can differentiate themselves by their very judgment about scale. I'll give you the opposite. Washington, D.C., for the last 150 years, has had a 150-foot height limit. So if you go to Washington, there's no towers, there's no big tall buildings. Everything's 150 feet or less. Well, now they're talking about getting rid of it. I said to them, that's one of the ways to lose your image. That's one of the ways to make you just like everyone else, make you might as well be like Hong Kong. It's very important that you could take a lower scale. I recommended in Moscow, in a plan we did last year, that they have a maximum building height of 10 stories. Because that's the traditional Moscow scale. They haven't built a lot of towers in the modern times, and it would differentiate that city from almost any other city in the world. So enjoy the alternative scale, is what I'm trying to say. You can have great fun with it, you can differentiate yourself in the marketplace, you can build more demand, and you'll make more happen.
2 more questions, so one over there, and then I've got one here.
It was this gentleman over there too.
Sorry.
We're going to go over here.
Yeah.
Hi. Just wondering, one of the ideas that's been floated for our waterfront is this concept of a transportation hub. I just wondered if you had any thoughts about that.
Well, there are transportation hubs and there are transportation hubs. It's according to what this transportation hub is. It's according to, in my opinion, what its footprint would be, what its parking needs are, for example, what its traffic demands would be. If the net effect of a transportation situation is that you have to have massive street systems in to serve it, you might not want to do that, where you want to build amenity and neighborliness and children at play and all that. If it's something that you can do on the edge of that or adjacent to that, but it gives you good jobs, then you might consider it. I'll give you an example back to I'm sorry to use Abu Dhabi, it's just so vivid at times. I saw a plan for one island in Abu Dhabi when we first arrived, where the 29-lane freeway took up 2/3 of the land of the island to serve the island. So we said, maybe you would like to not do that, because it'd be better to have land to build stuff on and find other ways to move people around or find other locations. Again, I go back to this gentleman's question on another topic. I believe there has to be a place for everything in the urban system. You have to ask yourself, where is the value you want to bring to each part of that system, at each location in that system? And you can take a great value potential, and I don't just mean financial value, I mean social, cultural, and emotional value, and diminish it dramatically by slamming something in that kills it. But it doesn't mean you don't have something. It means you might have to move it, do it a different way, or find a different location.
Last question. These have been great questions, but it is 8:30, so.
I wanted to start by thanking you for your presentation, and I think it's very positive. Nanaimo is not often challenged to make no small plans, and I think it's a really good conversation starter for us about the future of the community. One of the questions I had, though, was just about the beginning of the process. So Nanaimo doesn't necessarily have the same opportunity as Vancouver to host an Expo 86 or a Winter Olympics that both promote our community to the world, to create that level of demand, but also to bring about the capital infusion required to deal with some of the contamination on those waterfront sites. Similar to Vancouver, our waterfront was an industrial and has that history and has that level of either perceived contamination or real contamination, and it requires as you know, the marketability is difficult when the costs are so high. So I understand that there's the equation, as you say, is positive in the long run, but Nanaimo needs an initial kickstart of money to deal with those properties and get them ready for the construction. And we can't build on a scale that would attract global construction firms as may happen other places. So what would you suggest in terms of providing that capital infusion required to kickstart the process you're talking about?
Well, a couple of things that just come to my mind, and I like the question because I think it's an intelligent, foundational question to everything you want to do. First thing that comes to my mind is I'm reminded of Vienna. Old Vienna expanded in recent times, and they were not one of the strong European markets for growth. Their main starting point was that they had such a powerful plan with such a high level of public support and political support that investors, hard-nosed investors, looked at it and said, I think this will happen. I think it can happen. I can see my place in the marketplace of it happening. I'll invest. So in other words, it cut their risk. So I'm a great believer, first and foremost, that a great idea will help you. Now, if you come up with an average idea, not a very good idea, they won't help you. But a good idea will help you. Second thing is that I believe that with every physical plan needs to come two other planning activities. One is an economic strategy, and one is a communication strategy. So I think you have to tell the world about what you're up to. For example, I live in Vancouver. I honestly didn't realize how great this town is. No one's told me about it. No one's mentioned it except David, and he loves everything. But as you develop a strong plan, and don't downvalue that. That is so important. You need to also be developing a model for the implementation of that from an economic point of view and a communication strategy of it to the world. Both the general proposition here, which is that this is a great place to live, period, in the world, but also the specifics of how this is going to be a greater place and a green place and all the other things that we've talked about. So I think it's a combination. I will tell you in no uncertain terms, and I'm not telling you just as a theoretician or a professor, I'm telling you this as a person who has lived it, both as a planner and a developer, that you can build demand that wasn't there. You can cause people to want to come here who never thought about coming here. And growth is happening big time in the country, in the province, and here. It can happen here. But people don't have to come here. They don't. They have so many choices in the modern world. They're only going to great places. They're not going to second-rate places. But you have it to make that happen. What I would do here is that in an economic strategy, I would try to focus development into stages so that each stage is in and of itself coherent and consumers can see it and they can go, yeah, okay, I can buy this, I can live here, I'm good, I'm great with this. And you've got that started in the waterfront development that you've done. I think that reads very well. I'm sure it's very well thought of. But if you do it in stages and not do a bit over here and a bit over here and a bit over here, so it takes 25 years for it to come together, people will get that. People can understand it. The best way I have found to motivate people's interest is to model something. Do a case study, do a model, so you can show it to them. You don't have to tell it about them. People are cynical about being told, but when they see it, they go, oh yeah, I like it, yeah, this works for me, and they will do it. Then I think you need to find some funding mechanisms to go on top of that. For example, we have the ability in this country to use TIFs, tax increment finance districts. We're not using them. You could use them. It could, in fact, really give you a great source of funds. Basically, I don't know if you know what tax increment financing is, but basically what it is that you take the tax base in an area, you dream a future of the area, you estimate what the tax base is going to be after the dream, and you borrow the money to put the infrastructure in place to realize the dream, and then as the taxes go up, which they do, you pay for it. You pay it back. Tax increment finances are being used many places around the world. Canadian cities don't use incentives as well as they should, and you should think about incentives in this city to get it started. I always say in an urban development profile, in the early years you incentivize, and in the later years you reap the benefits, to put it bluntly.
On your behalf, I want to thank Larry, and we have some Vancouver Island items, some salmon, some wine, some other things. So please, with me, thank Larry for a great presentation. So hope to see you tomorrow, Dodds Narrows, 7 o'clock, the Ideas Forum, and a little segue that Larry did. As some of you know, we're into a successful cities initiative here in Nanaimo, which has morphed into Inspire Nanaimo, and we're actually on that track. We intend to be the most successful city in British Columbia at the very least. Thanks for coming, folks.